Good afternoon, my classics friends. It's a Wednesday afternoon at 3:10. We're back for more Virgil. Before we get to Virgil today, the Aeneid, we're going to do books 6 and 8 today. Um, but there's a little bit of housekeeping to do here first. First of all, I've been receiving a number of emails about the midterm grades. I've already addressed this in the video. So if you've emailed me recently and asked me when the midterm grades will be up, that you're just admitting that you haven't watched the videos. No, not that I'm keeping a list or anything like that, but um, so tell. Um, I am not going to post the midterm grades until probably the last day of classes. And there's a reason for that. There's a strategy behind that. And it has to do with how I'm going to do your grade evaluation for your final grade. Um, um, so just keep up with the videos, keep up with the readings and the work, and everything will take care of itself. You got what you got on the midterms. You can't change it now. So put it out of your mind. And oh, by the way, the final will cover everything following the first midterm. Uh, so that's everything after Thucydides. So what does that mean? We'll cover syllabus. Syllabus. It's the right syllabus. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Aristophanes. That's where Aeschylus, Sophocles, Aristophanes, Euripides, Plato, Virgil, and Ovid. We'll see if we can get to Seneca. Seneca might be eliminated from the syllabus. See how efficient I can be in terms of these lectures. Excuse me. Turn you sideways for a minute. The date of the final will be from one. No, wait. Which one is this? Yeah, this is MW12. So the date of that your final will be the 20th of May. It will be from 1 to 3. It will be. I plan to make it a real-time final. And when I say I plan to make it that, that's dependent on my ability to um, tame the beast that is Blackboard. If not, I'll come up with an alternate strategy. Um, so, um, yeah. Um, so that covers the finals, midterms and finals. Um, Another point of housekeeping with respect to this semester is that you may have noticed that there are two YouTube accounts associated with this class's material. I don't know how I intended to put everything on the Professor Pletcher channel, but I ended up using my personal channel by accident. Um, but I'm going to migrate them off. That's the Penn's Odyssey channel. If you're subscribed to that, those videos I'm gonna migrate them all over the next couple of days, beginning tonight. So you're gonna want to, if you go to the channel, if you subscribe to the Penn's Odyssey channel, and you go there and the video is gone all of a sudden, it's because I've moved it to that channel is named Professor Pletcher. So pretty straightforward there. And then the last thing I want to talk about is not about this semester, but about next semester. The administration is cutting classes with low enrollment. I have 4 classes next semester, 2 at the 2000, two at the 2000 level. But the one that, frankly speaking, I'm a bit worried about is reading tragedy. That's Classics 3220. That has a low enrollment, and therefore feels like it could be targeted for a cut, which would disappoint me greatly because I love teaching that class. We do all tragedy all semester, so enroll, sign up for it, please. Even if you sign, look, I mean, I don't mean to be cynical about this, and I hope no one from the administration is watching these videos, but like sign up for it now, and then you can, you know, drop it, halfway through the summertime, just as long as it gets finalized. So do me a solid and sign up for that class. Do me an even solider, sign up for the class and actually take the class. Okay? So it's like I said, it's the main focus is on classical tragedy. We did a sampling of that this semester. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, one play by each. We do multiple plays by those authors in the reading tragedy class, but we also do tragedy from the Elizabethan period. That would be what you associate Shakespeare with, though we don't do any Shakespeare. Not a Shakespeare fan, but we do other authors from that period, and then we move more towards the modern era as well. And there's a film component to that class as well. So it's a fun class to take. It will be much more highly organized than this class is, because I will have half a semester under my belt into the ins and outs of online teaching. So it will be a more sort of clean experience. Though I have to say, I just enjoy doing these videos. I get nervous about them beforehand, and I kind of put them off. I'm like, no, I got to do it now. And then when I finish it, I'm like, well, that was kind of fun. Though they are kind of exhausting. I'm not complaining. Not complaining. Okay, so when last we were with our hero Aeneas in Book 4, he had left Carthage, Dido having killed herself, because after all, Dido's not. She broke her vow of chastity, so there has to be a comeuppance for that. But again, it's also to go. Let me just refresh this. To go back to our list of 3 themes that I introduced last class, it's also a reference to Rome's conquest of Carthage in the actual historical Punic Wars. One of the things that Virgil wants to do in this text is to incorporate elements of Roman history, either overtly or symbolically, into the narrative story of Aeneas. Because again, one of the goals here is for us to understand that Virgil's Rome with Augustus as emperor is the ultimate culmination of destiny. So please excuse my sniffling. I seem to have caught a bit of a cold. He wants us to see. So, like I mentioned this already. When you hear Trojans, the echo comes back Romans. When you hear Aeneas, the echo comes back Augustus. Okay, so Aeneas is the prototype of Augustus, just as the Trojans are the prototype for the Romans. So Aeneas' conquest of Dido is a symbolic evocation of Rome's conquest of Carthage, remembering that the Punic Wars, there were gaps between the 3 Punic Wars, but they stretched from 260-something down to 140-something. So the Romans were constantly at war with the Carthaginians. It was those wars are of a special importance to Roman national identity because they established Rome as the dominant force I think last lecture I said Western Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean. And by this point, Rome is beginning to expand eastward and westward. And of course, by the time we get to Augustus, the empire will stretch from the Middle East to Spain, Britain to North Africa. And in fact, actually, Egypt at that point has been made a subsidiary of Rome. So it's huge at that stage. And so for the Romans, for your patrician class Roman, of course, they're the peak of destiny. I mean, look, they rule everything. The Romans came to refer to the Mediterranean Sea as Mare Nostrum, which is Latin for our sea, because they controlled everything around the the whole every territory that abutted the Mediterranean Sea was under Roman control by the time we get to Augustus's day. So you can understand you can understand. I'm not asking that you sympathize with it, but you can understand Rome's cultural arrogance in that respect. Okay, enough about Book 4 and Rome, Carthage, and Roman identity. Let's turn to Book 6. But when we open up with Book 6, Aeneas has successfully navigated his way to the shores of Italy, though he lands in southern Italy, and where Rome is founded is actually up in central Italy. So he's not exactly where he needs to be yet, but he's got something important to do in Book 6. He has to visit the Sibyl. Who is the Sibyl? She is the priestess of Apollo. So she's associated with Apollo. Come back to that in just a second. And there's two things that Aeneas wants from the Sibyl. One is a prophecy concerning his future, concerning his future, concerning his destiny, and the other is his dad died back in Book 3, which is part of Aeneas's narration of the flight from Troy. So when his dad died, he promised his dad that he would go to see him in the underworld. Totally perfectly reasonable promise for a son to make, right? And the Sibyl's cave temple is also at the same time the entrance into the underworld. Now, in ancient mythology, there are several different places that are said to be the entrance to the underworld. Any place that had an actual real-life cave could have been characterized as an entrance into the underworld. So he gets the prophecy. The prophecy of the Sibyl is not surprising because we've already heard it before. It's that Aeneas and his fellow Trojans will successfully conquer the area that is to become Rome, and then his descendants and their descendants and their descendants will be the Romans, and we'll get Augustus, and then it'll be a golden age. So no surprises there. But what I find more interesting than the prophecy itself, which I don't really find that interesting at all, because, like I said, we've already heard it. We've already heard it from Jupiter way back in Book 1, and we'll hear it again from his dad in the underworld at the end of Book 6. But it's the process of how she gives her prophecies. And it's not pleasant for her. If you go back into the text in Book 6 and you look at the way that Virgil narrates the prophecy of the Sibyl, you will see that she actually has to be physically possessed by Apollo. And it's a painful process, but it's painful in a very particular way because of the imagery that Virgil uses to describe the process. And that imagery is the same imagery and the same vocabulary that you would use in breaking a wild animal. He bestrides her, so he mounts her. He digs spurs into her side. He pulls her up with reins, and he whips her. So Sibyl becomes crazy. and she becomes it's this she has to be. So I mean, you can see what's going on here. The authoritative male source has to tame and subjugate the female vessel to utter the prophecies. So I'll come back to that later. Just stick a pin in that one. So they go into the underworld, and this is another part of Virgil locating Aeneas in the galaxy of heroes that we know from the Greek world and Greek myth, to really fully become that great hero. One way to do that, and we see this in multiple myths, is to make a journey into the underworld. Okay, Odysseus goes to the land of the dead. It's not the underworld in the Odyssey, but it's the farthest, westernmost location, because the west is always the land of the dead, because that's where the sun sets. I don't know if I'm pointing west here. It's north. Yeah, west. I got it right. So Odysseus is validated because he goes to the land of the dead and he returns. Heracles goes to the land of the dead and he returns. Theseus, one of the foundational heroes of ancient Athens, goes to the underworld and returns. So this is he's borrowing on that motif because he knows we as his Roman audience know these myths, and therefore will place Aeneas as a hero of equal stature. He too can go to the underworld and return, though there are complications to this. So they go down to the underworld, and we come to a river, and they have to cross the river, but the riverboat ferry, yes, the driver of the ferry, Ferry, is this guy called Charon, whom Virgil describes in menacing terms. This is one of the archetypes for what will later become the Grim Reaper. One of them. There's other ones too. But Charon doesn't want to take Odysseus across the river because he doesn't like taking living people across, because when living people come down, generally bad things happen. Heracles stole Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog. When Theseus went down, he went down to steal the queen of the underworld, Persephone, and so he was unsuccessful, by the way. But Aeneas has a special pass. He has a VIP pass, right? This is called the Golden Bough. Earlier in Book 6, there were two things that happened before the Sibyl episodes. I'm sorry, I got these out of order, but that's okay. One of Athenian's shipmates by the name of Maecenas offended the son of Poseidon and was drowned at sea. So they got to bury Maecenas. Why is this episode in here? If we're supposed to, because remember the Trojans are supposed to be a pious people, and this is an act of impiety. So what the burial of Maecenas represents is, again, Aeneas' father figure, because it's the father's job to maintain the discipline and the pietas of the family. So this is the restoration of piety. And then we get to this thing called the Golden Bough, because the Sibyl tells Aeneas that the only people who are destined to return to the underworld are those who can find and break off the golden bough. Bough means branch. Okay. I'm using this word golden bough because that's how it's traditionally referred to in Western literature. So I don't want to. In fact, there's a major work of mythical anthropology that came out in the early part of the 20th century. It's called the Golden Bough. And anyway, that's a side conversation. So what the Golden Bough, the Golden Bough represents, again, is destiny. If Aeneas can find it, break it off, go down to the underworld, and return, that again indicates that he is the man of destiny. So they're burying Maecenas. By burying, I mean they burn him. That counts as burial, cremation. Perform the death rites, maybe, is a better way to put it than simply say burial. But while the pyre is burning, Aeneas turns around and he looks at this forest, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of untamed wild forest. How are you going to find this one branch in all of that forest? So Aeneas says, how will I ever find the golden branch? If only I had somebody to help me. And sure enough, Mommy steps in, sending her 2 doves to lead Aeneas. They leap from tree to tree, and he follows them, and they lead him up to the Golden Bough, where he grabs it, and it's kind of tough at first, but then he snaps it off, right? So he is the man of destiny. So back to the underworld. He shows Charon his VIP pass, that is to say the Golden Bough, and so Charon has to take him across the river. So they come across the river. First place they come to is an area called Fields of Mourning, Mouring. I'm not going to write all of these things down, just the really central ones. In the Field of Mourning, we are told that there are 3 kinds of souls that occupy mourning. Again, M-O-U, not morning as in when the sun comes up. Mourning as in when you feel when you lament the loss of something, when you feel sad about something, when you're in despair. That's mourning. And that's where he encounters Dido. So in the Fields of Mourning, there are young babies who died before their period of ritual purification could be performed. For those of you who are Catholic, you will recognize the old Catholic doctrine that unbaptized babies go to, where do they go to? They go to limbo. Sorry, I did a little limbo there, but they go to this place called limbo, which is neither heaven nor hell. It's this kind of state of suspended animation or something like that. I don't know. And then that's one category. So the unpurified babies. Then you have the suicides, also are in Fields of Mourning, and then you have a third category, which are those who died of a broken heart. The broken-hearted lovers. Okay, so to answer the eternal question, what becomes of the broken-hearted? Well, we now know they go to the Fields of Mourning. That's not a dad joke. That's a granddad joke. Dido, interestingly enough, we might expect her to be with all the suicide souls, but instead she's not. She's with the broken-hearted lovers' souls, which is kind of interesting. And what's more interesting is that she's there with her first husband, Sichaeus. Remember, Sichaeus and Dido had been king and queen in the city of Tyre. There was a coup. Sichaeus was murdered. Dido and a group of loyal Phoenicians went to Carthage to found Libya. That's how she ended up there. But now she's been reunited with Sichaeus. So Aeneas walks up to her and says, "Was it my fault? Did you do this because of me?" And of course Dido doesn't say anything to him. She just gives him the dirty look and walks away with her husband Sichaeus. So what does this mean? What is the episode? So now we know that Dido should have been with her first husband. That is to say, she should have kept her vow of chastity and not done it with Aeneas, right? not attempted to pass off what she has as marriage with Aeneas. So she is where she is supposed to be. So if we had any qualms about uh, the moral uh, evaluation of the actions of Aeneas in Book 4, now we can wipe those away now. Because now we see that Dido was always supposed to be with her first husband. And so therefore it wasn't Aeneas's what happened there and Dido's suicide. No, it's not Aeneas's fault. That's Dido's fault. Okay, carrying on. We come to a fork in the road. One path goes off to the left, one path goes off to the right. Now, I'm going to have to make sure I get my left-right correct here. For you, because this is my left and this is your right. No, this is my left and this is my right. Yeah, okay, fair. Okay, so path to the left, in Latin, the left is sinistra, as in our English word sinister. The path that goes to the left leads us to the place of punishment. This is where the sinners go. The impious people. People who set themselves up as equal to the gods, or people who killed guests, or people who killed family members, especially their father. This is where the punishment goes. So the Sibyl says to Aeneas, Aeneas, we can't take this left-hand path because you're too virtuous. So it would be wrong for you to walk amongst all these sinners. If you get the idea that I interpret Aeneas as a Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, then you are correct. The path to the right, on the other hand, dextram, is that's the place of reward. That's where the pious people are found. And this place is called Elysium, or sometimes the Elysian Fields. Okay, so they're going to take the right-hand path and go to the place of reward. But Virgil knows that we as readers we really want to hear about these punishments going on in the Tartarus is the name of it, in the place of punishment. I mean, just think about it for a second. I mean, if you just think about this, like if you think about the poet Dante, who wrote the Divine Comedy, it's in three parts. The first one is the journey into hell. The second one is a journey through purgatory, which is like this intermediate space between heaven and hell, where people who weren't really bad enough to go to hell go, but weren't really good enough to get into heaven go, and they spend time in purgatory to have their sins purged, and then they're eventually allowed into heaven. That's Catholic doctrine, or at least I don't know if it's still official Catholic doctrine, but traditionally, and certainly in Dante's time, that was the doctrine. Many of you will have read the Inferno, the poem that deals with the journey into hell. Many, many fewer of you will have read the Purgatory or the Paradiso. Because, what do you really want to read about? Do you want to read about, Dante's beloved Beatrice on a cloud strumming a harp, living in eternal bliss? Or do you want to read about, corrupt popes frozen up to their necks in ice, next to each other, gnawing on each other's heads for eternity? Do you want to see the great Satan in the central circle of hell, with three faces in each mouth, chewing one of the great sinners of history? So Judas, the guy who betrayed Jesus to the Romans for crucifixion, and then Brutus, and I forget the other one is another Roman, who was involved in the assassination of Julius Caesar. These are who Dante sets up as the three great sinners who are for eternity being chewed on by Satan. I mean, what sounds? Yeah. I don't know. It just sounds more fun. Uh, uh, but so she narrates it all, and like I've already mentioned, I won't dwell too long on this because I do need to get to book 8. Though I'm not going to spend that much time on book 8. Just a few things. Um, so she narrates. She says, so Aeneas, you can't go there because you're too virtuous. But when I got the job as Sibyl, I was given a guided tour of the underworld. So I went through there, so I can tell you everyone who's in there. So she goes through them all, and like I said, they're all sins of impiety, setting oneself up as equal to the gods. Doing violence towards a family member, again, specifically your father, or killing guests, things of that nature. And so this is where we see Sisyphus, who tried to deceive the gods, rolling his rock up the hill, but never getting to the top of it, and various other great sinners from mythology. Okay. But we're headed on the rightward path, because that's, of course, this is where Anchises is. Because how could Aeneas' father be anywhere else but the place reserved for the most pious of all souls? So along the way, Aeneas encounters the shades, the souls of various, some of his former enemies, some of the Greeks, and those are not, they react with animosity, as one might expect. But eventually we get to Elysium, where we find there that there are. This is a place for the Romans, for Roman souls. Now here's where it gets a bit confusing. You're like, well, wait a minute. If we're still with the Trojans, how can there be Roman souls in the underworld when the Romans are the descendants of the Trojans? It doesn't make any sense. I will explain that in just a minute. Let me just put this up here real quick. So the rightward path takes you to the place of reward. The leftward path takes you to the place of impiety. Why right and left? Why do I bring that up? Because left-handed, from time immemorial, because left-handedness is a rare trait, it was therefore seen as something suspicious. So that's why the Latin word sinistra, that's where we get our English word sinister from. Whereas right-handedness was seen as normative. So from dextra, we get our English word dexterity, and dexterous, meaning skillful. So that's the right-left symbolism. And that's why, that's why all you lefties out there are creepy. And yeah, well, okay, I won't talk about that anymore. That's good enough for that. So, of course, Anchises, on seeing his son, says, "Oh, my son, of course I never worried that you wouldn't come to see me, because, of course, there's this relationship of pietas going on here." But for a moment, I want to talk about why there are Romans who haven't been born yet now in the underworld. And for this, I'm going to introduce our fourth theme in Virgil, which is the philosophy of Stoicism. I am going to have to spend a few minutes on this, so please be patient with me. So now we have 4 main, I refer to these as interpretative lenses, right? When we're reading Virgil, of course we're reading it as a continuation of Homer and seeing Virgil in the tradition of epic poetry. At the same time, we have another lens that we can read it through, which is Virgil's representation of Roman history as being the culmination of human destiny. I haven't talked about patronage. I'll come back to that probably when we get to book 12. And then we have Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism. So I need to talk for a minute about the philosophy of Stoicism. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds with this. I'm just going to break it down to its bare bones, because that's what the Romans did. It was originally a Greek philosophy that was concerned with, I think I might have already briefly talked about this to you, but it was concerned with one of the central questions of Greek philosophy, going back 500 years before Virgil, or 600 years before Virgil, was about Well, we will be the happiest when we find the best way to live. So if we can solve what the best way to live is, that will guarantee our happiness. So different schools of philosophy answered it in different ways. Different philosophers answered it in different ways. Then we come to a guy called Zeno of Elea, who taught um, from these guys. Like by the time we get into the late 400s, early 300s, the various philosophers would set up their schools in and around the marketplace of Athens, and where there were these sort of long walkways that were called stoas. And so that's where Stoicism gets its name from, because Zeno taught out of one of the fancier stoas. So that's why it's called Stoicism. In any case, what was the primary premise of Zeno's philosophy? Well, it's quite simple. I think we've already come across this, so I'll just do it quickly. Question of how do we become happy can be also formulated in what makes us sad, what makes us suffer. And Zeno's answer to that was when we want something and we can't have it, it's unattainable to us. And so that means that if we want to maximize our happiness, what we need to do is minimize our desires, or in many instances, eliminate our desires. And if we do that, then we can reach the state of, well, okay, I'll come back to that. That'll do that one last. So now the Romans, who, the young, wealthy Romans all did not all, but many of them went off to study in Athens as like their sort of college education. And then when they came back to Rome, that's where they learned poetry and philosophy and history. But when they returned to Rome, they were expected then immediately to go into public service. So amongst the young, educated Roman class, they would carry with them into their adulthood these ideas that have foundations in Greek thought. Okay, so that's good enough for that subject. But the thing about the Romans is they were really great at a lot of things. They were great architects, great engineers, great at what we would nowadays call infrastructure. They built aqueducts, water-bearing structures that some still stand today. They had, in ancient Rome, for those who could afford it, they had indoor plumbing, which is not a thing that people commonly associate with the ancient world. They were obviously highly organized at the bureaucratic level, because you had to be to rule an empire that goes from Spain to Jerusalem, and from Britain to Egypt. I mean, like, that takes a lot of administrative work. So they're very good at that. And obviously they were very good at conquest. They were very good at the military aspect of things, running the empire. What they were not so good at was philosophy, because the Roman mind was a practical mind, and a lot of the Greek philosophy, as we know from just that little tiny smattering that we got of Plato, it's highly theoretical, and requires a good deal of contemplation, and that wasn't useful for the Romans. So what they did is they took a lot of these philosophies and boiled them down to their most essential elements, and that's what the Romans did with Stoicism. So the Roman version of Stoicism is a basic conflict between reason and desire. Reason good, desire bad. So the idea here is to follow your reason and to squelch your desires. Okay? So another aspect of Stoicism is that, so if you can use your reason versus your desire, you can reach a state of the calmness of your soul. Okay? This is why Aeneas sleeps so well. This is why Aeneas is asleep while Troy is beginning to be destroyed. This is the reason why Aeneas has to be woken up by Mercury not once but twice, while Dido is essentially coming to kill him, because he doesn't have any worries. He didn't do anything wrong. He doesn't have anything to be concerned about. He's pious to his dad. So this state is called, now this is not a Latin word, this is a Greek word. This is from Zeno's original philosophy. Oh, I misspelled it already. Sorry, my fingers are not following my brain today. This state is called ataraxia. Ataraxia. And what it means is a sense of well, it's actually a negative word. It means no confusion or no disturbance in your mind. So it means calmness of soul, peace of mind, as we might say today. Okay. But another aspect of Stoicism is what we might read as, or what we might think of as reincarnation. It's got a fancier way of referring to it in philosophy, which is metempsychosis. So metempsychosis is the idea that the number of souls in the world are finite in number, and the point of the underworld is that souls are perfected there. After you die, your soul goes to the underworld. It has all of its imperfections burned out of it, all the things that are in the residue, the sinful residue in your soul from having acted on your desires over your reason. And then once they're purified, they're ready to be reinvested in human form. Okay. Okay, so that's Stoicism. And so you can, I mean, if you are thinking about this, you can probably already see how Virgil has been using this basic paradigm of reason versus desire throughout the work. You go back to Aeneas's account of the destruction of Troy. You see that the Greeks are people who act on, I wouldn't say that not unreasonable, but they're acting on greedy, desiring motivations. They want to take the city of Troy and take all the plunder from it. So that's acting on desire, right? Whereas the Romans are reasonable, or Romans. Sorry, no, not inappropriate. And Trojans are people of both piety and of reason. You see it, of course, in the Dido and Aeneas episode. Dido cannot resist her desire for Aeneas, and so even though her reason should tell her this is an impious action, she's acting on her desires, and so she gets what she deserves. If you act on your desires over your reason, you deserve to suffer. Or not even you deserve to suffer, you will suffer. Okay, so I'm sorry, with metempsychosis, explains why the souls of future Romans are in the underworld before Rome has even been founded, because their souls are perfected and waiting for Rome to happen in its various episodes. And so the Stoic ideal here is that you act on your reason, you act under the principles of pietas. Of course, this has both a religious aspect to it and a family aspect to it, specifically obedience to the father. And then in the religious aspect, you have their two duties that you have to fulfill. You have to make your sacrifices to the great gods, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, Apollo, So the Olympian, what we refer to as the Olympian gods, although again in Roman myth they don't live on Mount Olympus, they live in the Milky Way. I'll just call them the great gods. And then we saw also that you have your household gods or your hearth gods. These are your family gods. And since they represent protective spirits of your ancestors, that feeds back into family pietas. So it makes a nice little perpetual motion machine. You do your religious duties. By doing your religious duties, you're also therefore doing your family duties. By doing your family duties, you're also therefore fulfilling your religious piety as well. So you act on your reason over your desire. Your actions are governed by pietas. Remember, this is duty. It's not simply religious. There are other forms of duty as well. But you do your duty, you act with your reason, then you will get a happy ending. Or to put it in finer terms, you will reach a benevolent destiny, which is just a fancy way of saying a happy ending. It doesn't mean that you're going to get everything that you want in this life, and nor should it, because wanting is the thing that you're trying to eliminate anyway. It doesn't mean it might mean that you have to live in poverty your whole life, because to aspire to greater wealth or greater social status is a form of desire and will lead to suffering. So we see all of the Romans in the underworld. Aeneas asks his dad, who are all these people standing around looking so happy in the fields of the blessed in Elysium? And Anchises explains, these will be the future Romans to come. And not for the first time, nor for the last time in the text, will we get another narrative account of what the future of Rome holds. So he runs down through them all. There's remember, Rome starts as a monarchy, then it's a republic, and then becomes an empire. So there's a couple of kings there. Virgil kind of skirts around the Republican period a little bit because there's still some political issues with the transition from the Republic into the Empire, specifically having to do with Augustus's father. Now remember, Julius Caesar. Remember, he's not his real dad. He's his granduncle. So he's like his sister's kid's son. Is that how that would work? Yeah. But he was, for Caesar, the likeliest political heir to him. So Caesar adopted Augustus. And once you are adopted, that is seen as every bit as real a father-son bond as a biological father-son bond is. In Roman adoption, you could almost quite literally adopt anybody you wanted. They could be older than you. They could be already related to you. Both their parents could still be alive. And of course the point of adoption here was to make sure that was for, just as with marriage, and I talked about this already in Rome and the practice of marriage, but like for high-ranking Romans of the patrician class, it was not uncommon, and in fact was probably more common for these dudes to have 2, 3, 4 wives over the courses of their career, because it was a social climbing thing. So you're a young upcoming guy trying to make your name. Here's this, senator who has a daughter, so you marry his daughter, and then you're married for a while, and then here comes this other senator who's more important, more powerful, and richer. You divorce your wife from Senator A, and then you go off and get married to Senator B's wife, and so you climbed up a step. So this is now remember, I'm talking about social practice amongst the Roman patrician class. So 3%, 4% of the population, 5% maybe, is a generous estimate. Hence, any aspersion against Augustus or against Julius Caesar would also therefore be taken as an aspersion against Augustus. Because Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who thought he was threatening the Republic, Virgil has to be careful about praising the Republic too much. Because if he goes too much into how great the Republic was and how great these Republican senators were at the time, he runs the risk of implying that the assassination of Julius Caesar was justified, which means that which would then therefore cast aspersions on the legitimacy of Augustus's reign. Okay, so he kind of skirts around, but then we get down into the more contemporary Romans, and of course the whole thing culminates with Augustus and how wonderful Augustus is, and how Augustus is going to bring in this age of gold and start an empire that's going to last forever. So yeah, where am I at? Okay. This is a good time to talk about this theme, patronage. The only one I haven't hit on yet. So, again, when you were trying to, make it as an artist, then as now, you needed money, and you don't really make a lot of money off of art, especially when you are first starting. Once you make it, become a name and get a reputation, then you can cash in. But so what artists needed was somebody to help them out. Somebody who would pay the bills, pay the rent, and buy the food for them while they, walked amongst the muses. This person in Roman culture was known as a patron. You will see that this word patron shares, or it actually derives from, a word that we've already had, pater, father. So your patron was like your father figure, just as your dad pays your bills, at least ideally in the Roman model, just as your dad pays your bills, buys your food, teaches you discipline and direction. So your patron was seen as a kind of a father figure. Okay. You'll also note the root of other English words like patriotism, patriot here, all related back to the Latin word for father. Okay. So Virgil had a patron. Virgil's patron was a guy called Maecenas. Who was Maecenas? Maecenas was a member of Augustus's inner circle. In some ways, you can think of Maecenas as being something equivalent to Augustus's Secretary of State. Did a lot of diplomatic work for Augustus. It was a central key advisor to Augustus, so very closely, very much in Augustus's immediate orbit. So when you think about the dynamics of patronage, if, let's say, just forget about Rome for a second, just posit this hypothetical. Let's say you work for Company A. Company A has a regional manager. We'll call him Regional Manager X, who supervises your manager. So he'd be Manager Y, and then you're there, your employee Z. If you're employee Z and you badmouth Manager X, Manager Y, your immediate supervisor, is not going to take kindly to that, because if it gets back to Manager X, then he's not going to come after you. He's going to come after Manager Y, who's then going to have to come after you. So you're not going to criticize your boss's boss. Likewise with Virgil, because Maecenas is his patron, he's not likely to go out and make implicit criticisms about Augustus, though that will become a bit problematic as we get towards the end of the Aeneid. So the whole act of praising Augustus is in and of itself a reflection on the system of patronage. Okay. But there's other elements here too. There's that one. There's out of all the Roman souls that have yet to be born, there's one that's gloomy. Has a dark cloud over his head, and he's sort of gloomy. And he asks, Virgil asks his dad, "Who's that guy? How come he's not happy like everybody else?" And his dad tells him, "Oh, that boy's name is Marcellus. And though he will show much promise, and he says, be beloved by all of the Trojan race." Now, see, in this passage, you begin to see how Virgil cleverly interchanges what he describes as Roman and what he describes as Trojan, because again, we're supposed to see a continuity between the two things. So the two descriptive terms are somewhat interchangeable. So, who is this Marcellus? Marcellus himself was the adopted son of Augustus, whom Augustus was training to be his heir. And because he was the adopted son of Augustus, naturally, he was very popular in Rome. And he was, I forget his exact age, it was like 18, 19, 20. And he was in training in horseback exercises, and he fell off. And he sustained injuries that he eventually died from, which broke Augustus's heart. He went into a state of mourning that lasted so long that his advisors had to come and say, "Listen, we're sorry too, but we got an empire to run here." So he had to be kind of talked out of his state of mourning, if we believe the accounts of some of the historians, the ancient historians. So again, he's playing. Now remember, when Virgil premiered this, he would have recited it to a small select group that included Augustus's wife, Maecenas, and the other extremely high-ranking advisors, officials, senators, etc. And so it was like a private performance. And story goes that Augustus wept openly at the mention of Marcellus, and that his wife fainted, which is kind of funny because there is some speculation that she was angling to get her son from a previous marriage to be the next emperor. And again, according to some historical reports, it was her doctor that attended to Marcellus, not Augustus's private doctor, which is suspicious in its own terms. Augustus's wife was called Livia, Livia, and from all accounts, she was a very driven, very powerful woman who had a lot of influence at the political level. Okay, so that's enough talking about that. So anyway, but then it comes time to leave the underworld, and so Anchises leads his son out, and again we get two gates, just as there were two roads in the underworld, so there are two exits out of the underworld, and so they're gates. So you think of them as kind of like archways, and they're made of two different materials. The one on the left is made of ivory. Well, Virgil doesn't specify that it's on the left, but I'm editorializing there, but it's not a wild suggestion. And the other one is made out of horn. So horn means like polished animal horn that you can then interlock into structures to make structures. Like if you want to Google search like an antler chair, you'll see a good example of how you can use animal horns. Okay, so through the gate of animal horn, Anchises tells us, that's where the true shades pass. I'll come back to that in just a second. And through the gate of ivory, that's where the false shades pass. Now, what do I mean? What does Virgil mean when he uses this term shade? In the ancient world, the most common belief is that dreams, A, contain prophetic value, and B, are actually visitations by what I suppose nowadays we would call ghosts. These are yeah. So these are visitations from spirits that contain some kind of prophetic value. So what this means is that when the prophecy given to you in your dream is true, that shade came through the gate of horn. But when the prophecy that was given you was meant to be misleading or damaging to you, that came through the gate of ivory or false. So, like, this is where your nightmares come through the gate of ivory. So, I mean, we think about everything we know about Aeneas and Anchises, and so it seems perfectly reasonable that Anchises would lead Aeneas through the gate of horn, because truth is associated with reason, is associated with piety, and those are all the things that we're supposed to think about Aeneas, right? That ain't what happens. Anchises leads Aeneas through the gate of ivory, through the false gate, which is really, from a thematic standpoint, it's odd. It kind of runs counter to, like, the Mr. Goody Two Shoes that we've been getting for the previous 6 books. I mean, remember, Virgil manipulates his narrative so that anything that Aeneas does that we think might be morally questionable is already answered for. Right? He leaves Troy before it's destroyed. Oh, he's a coward. No, he's not. Hector said it was okay for him to leave. Oh, he goes off and he has this affair with Dido, but never commits to a legitimate marriage, so that's a moral fault of his. No, it's not. His wife said that it was okay for him to find a new wife, and maybe it was Dido. How was he to know? And B, it's Dido's fault anyway, because she can't control herself. So, so Virgil, I don't want to say ties himself in knots, but, like, he makes a real concerted effort to make sure that we don't attribute any negative moral qualities to Aeneas. But then all of a sudden, clang, he goes through the gate of falsehood instead of the gate of truth, or the gate of horn. Okay, I'm going to stop there, which means that I have to do books 8 and 12 in the next lecture. I'm not going to have time today to get through what I want to get through in book 8, so I'll just do book 8 and 12 for the next lecture, which I will do at some stage prior to next Monday. Okay, bye.